He's dangerous. He's been pretending to be a decent man for years. My wife shouted in open court, not whispered, not suggested, shouted loudly enough that conversations stopped outside the courtroom doors. Every head turned toward me. The court reporter paused mid-sentence. Even the bailiff looked up from the entrance. Then my father-in-law rose from his seat, pointed directly at me with a shaking finger and declared, "My daughter wasted 8 years of her life on this. Fraud." My mother-in-law slowly stood beside him. She didn't cry. She simply looked at me with cold disappointment and said, "We welcomed a stranger into our family." Those words weren't emotional. They sounded rehearsed, polished, repeated so many times they no longer felt natural. And through all of it, I remained silent. My name is Ethan Brooks, and that was the exact moment I realized I wasn't sitting in divorce court to save my marriage anymore. I was sitting there to protect the only thing they hadn't managed to destroy: my reputation. 8 years earlier, Olivia wasn't like this. She laughed at my terrible jokes, surprised me with coffee after long shifts, and told everyone I was the kindest man she'd ever met. Somewhere along the way, kindness stopped being enough. She wanted a bigger house, a newer car, better vacations, more expensive friends. Success became something measured by photographs instead of peace. I never chased status. I worked as a forensic accountant for a government fraud division. My job wasn't glamorous, but I loved exposing lies hidden behind expensive suits and polished smiles. Olivia hated that answer whenever someone asked what I did. She'd interrupt before I could finish and say, "He's basically an accountant." I'd smile because arguing never solved anything. Looking back, I should have noticed how often. She rewrote small truths long before she started rewriting my entire life. Everything changed after my father's death. Losing him hit me harder than I expected. I struggled for months with anxiety and sleepless nights. My doctor suggested therapy. I went willingly. Therapy helped me rebuild myself piece by piece. I trusted Olivia enough to tell her everything: the panic attacks, the guilt, the fear of never feeling normal again. She held my hand after every appointment. She promised those conversations would stay between us forever. I believed her because that's what marriage is supposed to be. Trust without conditions.
3 months before she filed for divorce, little things started disappearing. Friends stopped inviting me to gatherings. Coworkers became unusually careful around me. One afternoon, my supervisor quietly asked if everything was all right at home because someone had anonymously claimed I was emotionally unstable. I laughed it off, but something felt wrong. Then the divorce papers arrived. They described me as controlling, emotionally unpredictable, psychologically manipulative, and potentially unsafe. Reading those pages felt like reading about someone I'd never met. Rebecca Hayes, my attorney, closed the file and looked at me calmly. "Don't react emotionally," she said. "People who build cases on lies usually become overconfident. Let them keep talking." I followed her advice. Every accusation they made was answered with facts instead of anger. Olivia claimed I screamed during arguments. My phone contained voice recordings she'd forgotten existed because we often used a home assistant device that automatically stored conversations after voice activation. Every recording showed the opposite. She yelled. I stayed quiet. She claimed I monitored her finances. Bank records showed she controlled every joint account password. She claimed I isolated her from friends. Text messages showed I encouraged weekend trips with them even when I stayed home. Every lie required another lie to support it. I simply organized everything into folders. The first hearing lasted less than an hour. Olivia cried almost on command. Her lawyer spoke passionately about emotional abuse, describing me as a deeply troubled man hiding behind a calm personality. My in-laws nodded dramatically from the gallery. I didn't interrupt once. When the judge finally looked toward Rebecca, she stood and said only one sentence. "Your Honor, the respondent requests permission to submit additional evidence at the next hearing." That was all. Olivia smiled as though she'd already won. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, hoping for dramatic reactions. Cameras followed us down the steps. "Mr. Brooks, are the allegations true?" one reporter shouted. I kept walking. Rebecca smiled slightly. "Good," she whispered. "They're expecting you to explode. Every minute you don't, they become less careful." She was right. 4 days later, my office receptionist handed me a plain envelope with no return address. "Someone insisted you receive this personally," she said. Inside was a small flash drive and a handwritten note containing only 6 words. She forgot to delete these first. My hand suddenly felt cold. Rebecca insisted we examine everything together. We plugged the drive into a secure computer. It contained dozens of screenshots, deleted text messages, and 2 video recordings. The first video showed Olivia sitting inside a restaurant with her best friend, Vanessa. Neither knew the security camera above them recorded audio because they were seated directly beneath it. Olivia laughed while stirring her coffee. "The therapy thing is perfect," she said. "Once people hear counseling, anxiety, and medication, they'll assume he's unstable without asking questions." Vanessa laughed. "Do you think the judge will believe it?" Olivia smiled confidently. "Judges see hundreds of cases. They don't have time to investigate every detail. You just make him look unpredictable." Rebecca paused the video. Neither of us spoke. The second recording was worse. Olivia was talking on the phone. "If he stays calm, keep pushing. Eventually everyone loses control. I only need one angry reaction." My stomach tightened. For months I'd questioned myself, wondered whether I had somehow become the person she described. Listening to those recordings erased every doubt. Rebecca immediately contacted a digital forensic examiner. Every timestamp, audio file, and security recording was authenticated. Nothing had been edited. Then another surprise arrived. A woman named Melissa called Rebecca's office asking for a confidential meeting. I'd never met her before. She introduced herself as Olivia's former co-worker. The moment she sat down, she looked exhausted. "I can't keep lying," she admitted quietly. "Olivia asked me to testify that I witnessed Ethan threatening her." Rebecca asked the obvious question. "Did you?" Melissa shook her head immediately. "No, it never happened." She reached into her handbag and produced several folded sheets of paper. "These are the notes she gave me." Rebecca unfolded them carefully. Across the top, someone had written, "Witness talking points." Underneath were instructions. Say he intimidated co-workers. Mention therapy if possible. Don't provide exact dates unless asked. Cry if necessary. Rebecca slowly looked up at me. Neither of us needed to say what we were both thinking. Melissa lowered her head. "I'm sorry I waited this long." "I was afraid," I nodded. "You're here now." She looked relieved, almost as though she'd been carrying the weight of someone else's lie for months. Before leaving, she said something I'll never forget. "People like Olivia don't just lie once. They build entire worlds around those lies. Eventually, everyone inside that world gets trapped." The second hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Olivia walked into court wearing soft pastel colors and carrying a folder filled with carefully organized paperwork. She smiled confidently at her attorney before glancing toward me. She believed everything was still going according to plan. She didn't know the anonymous flash drive had already been verified. She didn't know Melissa had agreed to testify. She didn't know Rebecca had quietly filed a motion requesting the court review newly discovered digital evidence before witness testimony even began. As I took my seat inside the courtroom, Rebecca leaned toward me and spoke so quietly only I could hear. "Don't change anything. Stay exactly the way you've been from the beginning." I looked across the room at Olivia. She smiled again, completely unaware that the case she'd spent months constructing wasn't about to collapse because of something I said. It was about to collapse because of something she said when she thought no one was listening. The courtroom felt different the moment the second hearing began. The confidence Olivia had carried through every previous appearance was still there, but it seemed forced now. She smiled at her attorney, adjusted the sleeve of her blazer, and avoided looking directly at me. She had no idea that every carefully rehearsed accusation she planned to repeat was about to unravel. The judge entered, reviewed the case file for several quiet moments, and then looked toward Rebecca. "Counselor, I understand you have additional evidence." Rebecca stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Before testimony continues, we'd like to submit authenticated digital recordings, witness documentation, and forensic reports directly related to the petitioner's claims." Olivia's attorney immediately objected. "We haven't reviewed any new material." Rebecca calmly slid a thick folder across the table. "You have now." The judge nodded toward the bailiff. "Proceed." The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly as a monitor was switched on. Rebecca pressed play. Olivia's voice immediately echoed through the room. "The therapy thing is perfect. Once people hear counseling and anxiety, they'll assume he's unstable. Every Person sitting behind us became completely silent. Olivia's expression changed instantly. She leaned toward her attorney and whispered frantically, but he simply stared at the screen. The recording continued. I only need one angry reaction. If he loses his temper once, the entire case becomes easy. Rebecca paused the video. No one spoke. The judge removed his glasses and looked directly at Olivia. Is that your voice? Olivia swallowed. It sounds like me, but I don't remember that conversation. Rebecca handed the forensic authentication report to the court. The recording has been independently verified. No edits, no alterations. Original timestamp included. The judge slowly nodded before setting the report beside him. Olivia's attorney quickly stood. Your Honor, even if these recordings are authentic, they don't necessarily prove malicious intent. Rebecca smiled politely. Perhaps our next witness will help clarify that. The courtroom doors opened and Melissa walked inside. She looked nervous but determined. After taking the oath, she sat in the witness chair and folded her hands tightly together. Rebecca approached her gently. Ms. Collins, do you know the petitioner? Melissa nodded. We worked together for almost 3 years. Did she ever discuss this divorce with you? Melissa hesitated for only a second. Almost every day, Olivia's face immediately lost color. Rebecca continued. Did she ever ask you to testify? Yes. Did she ask you to tell the truth? Melissa looked toward Olivia before answering. No. She reached into her purse and handed Rebecca several folded pages. She gave me these notes. Rebecca unfolded them and passed copies to the judge and opposing counsel. The heading read Witness Preparation. Underneath were handwritten instructions explaining exactly what to say about me, how to answer difficult questions, and even reminders to cry if necessary. A murmur spread across the courtroom. Olivia suddenly stood. Those notes don't prove anything. The judge raised his hand immediately. Sit down, Mrs. Brooks. She slowly lowered herself back into her chair, but the confidence she'd carried for months had completely disappeared. Rebecca turned back toward Melissa. Did you ever witness Mr. Brooks threatening your co-worker? Never. Did you ever witness violent behavior? No. Why did you come forward? Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Because innocent people shouldn't lose their lives to someone else's lies. For the first time since the divorce began, every eye in the courtroom shifted toward Olivia instead of me. She looked trapped. Every accusation she'd repeated for months suddenly seemed hollow. Her attorney quietly whispered something into her ear, but she barely reacted. The judge reviewed the witness notes carefully before speaking. Mrs. Brooks, would you like to explain why these documents instruct witnesses on exactly what emotional language to use? Olivia looked toward her attorney one last time before answering. I was afraid nobody would believe me. The judge didn't interrupt. She continued speaking. I thought if I explained things strongly enough. Her voice cracked. People would understand how unhappy I was. The judge leaned forward slightly. Being unhappy in a marriage does not permit someone to manufacture evidence. Rebecca remained silent. She didn't need to ask another question because Olivia had begun unraveling on her own. The judge then turned toward me. Mr. Brooks, do you wish to make any statement before the court concludes testimony? I stood slowly. Every person in the room watched me. Only one, Your Honor. The courtroom became completely still. I never came here asking the court to make my wife love me again. That ended long before these hearings began. I came here because my reputation is the only thing my father left me. I couldn't allow false accusations to become the final chapter of my name. Then I sat back down. That was all I said. The judge announced a short recess before delivering the final ruling. Later that afternoon, during the break, Olivia remained seated while everyone else left the courtroom. Her attorney looked exhausted. He quietly packed his briefcase without saying much. When court resumed, the atmosphere had completely changed. The judge entered carrying a thicker case file than before. He looked toward both attorneys before beginning. This court has reviewed all testimony, authenticated recordings, witness statements, forensic reports, and documentary evidence submitted by both parties. He paused briefly. The evidence demonstrates a deliberate effort to exaggerate and misrepresent the respondent's mental health history in order to obtain legal advantage during these proceedings. No one moved. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court finds no credible evidence supporting allegations of emotional instability. intimidation, or threatening conduct by Mr. Brooks. Olivia slowly lowered her head. Instead, the evidence establishes a coordinated attempt to influence witness testimony, distort medical history, and present misleading information before this court. Her attorney closed his eyes for a moment. He already knew what was coming. Accordingly, the judge said firmly, the petitioner's request for financial penalties, exclusive possession of the marital residence, and claims for emotional damages are denied. Olivia's shoulders dropped. The respondent shall retain sole ownership of the residence, all personal retirement accounts held prior to marriage, and reimbursement of legal fees resulting from false claims presented during these proceedings. The courtroom remained silent. Then the judge looked directly at Olivia one final time. Family courts exist to protect vulnerable people. They cannot perform that duty if dishonesty becomes strategy. This court hopes today's decision serves as a reminder that truth requires no performance. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom. It was over. Olivia walked past me in the hallway without saying a single word. She didn't apologize. She didn't look back. She simply disappeared through the courthouse doors, surrounded by the silence she'd once hoped to bury me with. Rebecca smiled as she handed me the signed judgment. "Congratulations," she said quietly. I shook my head. "It doesn't feel like winning." She understood immediately. "No," she replied. "It feels like getting your life back." Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Friends who had quietly distanced themselves began calling again. Former co-workers apologized for believing rumors. Even neighbors who had avoided eye contact stopped to ask how I was doing. I never criticized Olivia. I never posted the recordings online. I never celebrated publicly. The truth had already done everything it needed to do. A month later, I received a handwritten letter from Melissa. She thanked me for showing her that honesty sometimes arrives late. But it still matters. I framed that letter beside an old photograph of my father. Underneath it, I placed a note he'd written years earlier that simply read, "Character is what remains after people finish talking about you." Looking at those words, I finally understood what this entire journey had been about. Olivia tried to destroy my reputation with accusations. I could have answered every lie with anger, revenge, or public humiliation. Instead, I answered with patience, evidence, and truth. Lies can run fast, but eventually they become exhausted because they need constant protection. Truth walks slowly. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It simply keeps moving until it arrives. And when it finally does, it doesn't need anyone to defend it anymore.